Section 20 of Essays of Schopenhauer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arden. Essays of Schopenhauer by Arthur Schopenhauer. Translated by Sarah Hay Dirks. The Metaphysics of Love, Part 2. And now let us more thoroughly investigate the matter. Egoism is a quality so deeply rooted in every personality that it is on egotistical ends only that one may safely rely in order to rouse the individual to activity. To be sure, the species has a prior, nearer, and greater claim on the individual than the transient individuality itself, and yet even when the individual makes some sort of conscious sacrifice for the perpetuation and future of the species, the importance of the matter will not be made sufficiently comprehensible to his intellect, which is mainly constituted to regard individual ends. Therefore nature attains her ends by implanting in the individual a certain illusion by which something which is in reality advantageous to the species alone seems to be advantageous to himself. Consequently, he serves the latter, while he imagines he is serving himself. In this process, he is carried away by a mere chimera, which floats before him and vanishes again immediately, and as a motive takes the place of reality. This illusion is instinct. In most instances, instinct may be regarded as the sense of the species which presents to the will whatever is of service to the species. But because the will has here become individual, it must be deceived in such a manner for it to discern by the sense of the individual what the sense of the species has presented to it. In other words, imagine it is pursuing ends concerning the individual, when in reality it is pursuing merely general ends, using the word general in its strictest sense. Outward manifestation of instinct can be best observed in animals, where the part it plays is most significant, but it is in ourselves alone that we can get to know its internal process, as of everything internal. It is true, it is thought that man has scarcely any instinct at all, or at any rate has only sufficient instinct when he is born to seek and take his mother's breast. But as a matter of fact, man has a very decided, clear, and yet complicated instinct, namely for the selection, both earnest and capricious, of another individual, to satisfy his instinct of sex. The beauty or ugliness of the other individual has nothing whatever to do with this satisfaction in itself. That is, insofar as it is a matter of pleasure based upon a pressing desire of the individual. The regard, however, for this satisfaction, which is so zealously pursued, as well as the careful selection it entails, has obviously nothing to do with the chooser himself, although he fancies that it has. Its real aim is the child to be born, in whom the type of the species is to be preserved in as pure and perfect a form as possible. For instance, different phases of the generation of the human form are the consequences of 1,000 physical accidents and moral delinquencies, and yet the genuine type of the human form is in all its parts always restored. Further, this is accomplished under the guidance of the sense of beauty, which universally directs the instinct of sex, and without which the satisfaction of the latter would deteriorate to a repulsive necessity. Accordingly, everyone in the first place will infinitely prefer and ardently desire those who are most beautiful, in other words, those in whom the character of the species is most purely defined, and in the second, everyone will desire in the other individual those perfections which he himself lacks, and he will consider imperfections, which are the reverse of his own, beautiful. This is why little men prefer big women, and fair people like dark, and so on. The ecstasy with which a man is filled at the sight of a beautiful woman, making him imagine that union with her will be the greatest happiness, is simply the sense of the species. The preservation of the type of the species rests on this distinct preference for beauty, and this is why beauty has such power. We will later on fully state the considerations which this involves. It is really instinct aiming at what is best in the species, which induces a man to choose a beautiful woman, although the man himself imagines that by so doing he is only seeking to increase his own pleasure. As a matter of fact, we have here an instructive solution of the secret nature of all instinct, which almost always, as in this case, prompts the individual to look after the welfare of the species. The care with which an insect selects a certain flower or fruit, or piece of flesh, or the way in which the ichneumon seeks the larva of a strange insect, so that it may lay its eggs in that particular place only, and to secure which it fears neither labor nor danger, is obviously very analogous to the care with which a man chooses a woman of a definite nature individually suited to him. He strives for her with such ardor that he frequently, in order to attain his object, will sacrifice his happiness in life, in spite of all reason, by a foolish marriage, by some love affair which costs him his fortune, honor, and life, even by committing crimes. And all this in accordance with the will of nature, which is everywhere sovereign, so that he may serve the species in the most efficient manner, although he does so at the expense of the individual. Instinct everywhere works as with the conception of an end, and yet it is entirely without one. Nature implants instinct where the acting individual is not capable of understanding the end, or would be unwilling to pursue it. Consequently, as a rule, it is only given prominently to animals, and in particular to those of the lowest order, which have the least intelligence. But it is only in such a case as the one we are at present considering that it is also given to man, who naturally is capable of understanding the end, but would not pursue it with the necessary zeal. That is to say, he would not pursue it at the cost of his individual welfare. So that here, as in all cases of instinct, truth takes the form of illusion in order to influence the will. All this, however, on its part, throws light upon the instinct of animals. They, too, are undoubtedly carried away by a kind of illusion, which represents that they are working for their own pleasure, while it is for the species that they are working with such industry and self-denial. The bird builds its nest, the insect seeks a suitable place wherein to lay its eggs, or even hunts for prey, which it dislikes itself, but which must be placed beside the eggs as food for the future larva. The bee, the wasp, and the ant apply themselves to their skillful building and extremely complex economy. All of them are undoubtedly controlled by an illusion, which conceals the service of the species under the mask of an egotistical purpose. This is probably the only way in which to make the inner a subjective process, from which spring all manifestations of instinct, intelligible to us. The outer or objective process, however, shows in animals strongly controlled by instinct, as insects, for instance, a preponderance of the ganglion, i.e. subjective nervous system, over the objective or cerebral system, from which it may be concluded that they are controlled not so much by objective and proper apprehension as by subjective ideas, which excite desire and arise through the influence of the ganglionic system upon the brain. Accordingly, they are moved by a certain illusion. The great preponderance of brain in man accounts for his having fewer instincts than the lower order of animals, and for even these few easily being led astray. For instance, the sense of beauty which instinctively guides a man in his selection of a mate is misguided when it degenerates into the proneness to pederasty. Similarly, the bluebottle, Musca vomitoria, which instinctively ought to place its eggs in putrefied flesh, lays them in the blossom of the Aurum dracunculus because it is misled by the decaying odor of this plant. That an absolutely generic instinct is the foundation of all love of sex may be confirmed by a closer analysis of the subject, an analysis which can hardly be avoided. In the first place, a man in love is by nature inclined to be inconstant, while a woman constant. A man's love perceptibly decreases after a certain period. Almost every other woman charms him more than the one he already possesses. He longs for change, while a woman's love increases from the very moment it is returned. This is because nature aims at the preservation of the species, and consequently at as great an increase in it as possible. This is why a man is always desiring other women, while a woman always clings to one man, for nature compels her intuitively and unconsciously to take care of the supporter and protector of the future offspring. For this reason, conjugal fidelity is artificial with a man but natural to a woman. Hence, a woman's infidelity, looked at objectively on account of the consequences, and subjectively on account of its unnaturalness, is much more unpardonable than a man's. In order to be quite clear and perfectly convinced that the delight we take in the other sex, however objective it may seem to be, is nevertheless merely instinct disguised, in other words, the sense of the species striving to preserve its type, it will be necessary to investigate more closely the considerations which influence us in this, and go into details, strange as it may seem for these details to figure in a philosophical work. These considerations may be classed in the following way. Those that immediately concern the type of the species, id est, beauty. those that concern other physical qualities, and finally, those that are merely relative and spring from the necessary correction or neutralization of the one-sided qualities and abnormities of the two individuals by each other. Let us look at these considerations separately. The first consideration that influences our choice and feelings is age. The second consideration is that of health. A severe illness may alarm us for the time being, but an illness of a chronic nature, or even cachexy, frightens us away, because it would be transmitted. The third consideration is the skeleton, since it is the foundation of the type of the species. Next to old age and disease, nothing disgusts us so much as a deformed shape. Even the most beautiful face cannot make amends for it. In fact, the ugliest face combined with a well-grown shape is infinitely preferable. Moreover, we are most keenly sensible of every malformation of the skeleton, as for instance, a stunted, short-legged form, and the like, or a limping gait, when it is not the result of some extraneous accident, while a conspicuously beautiful figure compensates for every defect. It delights us. Further, the great importance which is attached to small feet. This is because the size of the foot is an essential characteristic of the species, for no animal has the tarsus and metatarsus combined so small as man. Hence the uprightness of his gait. He is a plantigrade. And Jesus Sirach has said, according to the improved translation by Krauss, a woman that is well grown and has beautiful feet is like pillars of gold and sockets of silver. The teeth, too, are important, because they are essential for nourishment, and quite peculiarly hereditary. The fourth consideration is a certain plumpness, in other words, a superabundance of the vegetative function, plasticity. Hence, excessive thinness strikingly repels us. The last consideration that influences us is a beautiful face. Here, too, the bone parts are taken into account before everything else, so that almost everything depends on a beautiful nose, while a short retroussé one will mar all. A slight upward or downward turn of the nose has often determined the life's happiness of a great many maidens, and justly so, for the type of the species is at stake. A small mouth by means of small maxillae is very essential, as it is the specific characteristic of the human face as distinguished from the muzzle of the brutes. A receding, as it were, a cutaway chin is particularly repellent, because mentum prominulum is a characteristic belonging exclusively to our species. Finally, we come to the consideration of beautiful eyes and a beautiful forehead. They depend upon the psychical qualities, and in particular the intellectual, which are inherited from the mother. The unconscious considerations which, on the other hand, influence women in their choice naturally cannot be so accurately specified. In general, we may say the following, that the age they prefer is from 30 to 35. For instance, they prefer men of this age to youths, who in reality possess the highest form of human beauty. The reason for this is that they are not guided by taste, but by instinct, which recognizes in this particular age the acme of generative power. In general, women pay little attention to beauty, that is, to beauty of face. They seem to take it upon themselves alone to endow the child with beauty. It is chiefly the strength of a man and the courage that goes with it that attract them, for both of these promise the generation of robust children, and at the same time a brave protector for them. Every physical defect in a man, any deviation from the type, a woman may, with regard to the child, eradicate if she is faultless in these parts herself or excels in a contrary direction. The only exceptions are those qualities which are peculiar to the man, and which, in consequence, a mother cannot bestow on her child. These include the masculine build of the skeleton, breadth of shoulder, small hips, straight legs, strength of muscle, courage, beard, and so on. And so it happens that a woman frequently loves an ugly man, albeit she never loves an unmanly man, because she cannot neutralize his defects. The second class of considerations that are the source of love are those depending on the psychical qualities. Here we shall find that a woman universally is attracted by the qualities of a man's heart or character, both of which are inherited from the father. It is mainly firmness of will, determination, and courage, and may be honesty and goodness of heart too, that win a woman over, while intellectual qualifications exercise no direct or instinctive power over her, for the simple reason that these are not inherited from the father. A lack of intelligence carries no weight with her. In fact, a superabundance of mental power, or even genius, as abnormities, might have an unfavorable effect. And so we frequently find a woman preferring a stupid, ugly, and ill-mannered man to one who is well-educated, intellectual, and agreeable. Hence, people of extremely different temperament frequently marry for love. That is to say, he is coarse, strong, and narrow-minded, while she is very sensitive, refined, cultured, and aesthetic, and so on. Or he is genial and clever, and she is a goose. Sic visum veneri, qui placet in pares, formas atqua animos subjuga anea, saivo miteri cum ioco. The reason for this is that she is not influenced by intellectual considerations, but by something entirely different, namely, instinct. Marriage is not regarded as a means for intellectual entertainment, but for the generation of children. It is a union of hearts and not of minds. When a woman says that she has fallen in love with a man's mind, it is either a vain and ridiculous pretense on her part, or the exaggeration of a degenerate being. A man, on the other hand, is not controlled in instinctive love by the qualities of the woman's character. This is why so many a Socrates has found his Xantippe, as for instance, Shakespeare, Albrecht Dürer, Byron, and others. But here we have the influence of intellectual qualities, because they are inherited from the mother. Nevertheless, their influence is easily overpowered by physical beauty, which concerns more essential points, and therefore has a more direct effect. By the way, it is for this reason that mothers who have either felt or experienced the former influence have their daughters taught the fine arts, languages, etc., so that they may prove more attractive. In this way, they hope by artificial means to pad the intellect, just as they do their bust and hips if it is necessary to do so. Let it be understood that here we are simply speaking of that attraction which is absolutely direct and instinctive, and from which springs real love. That an intelligent and educated woman esteems intelligence and brains in a man, and that a man, after deliberate reasoning, criticizes and considers the character of his fiancée, are matters which do not concern our present subject. Such things influence a rational selection in marriage, but they do not control passionate love, which is our matter. Up to the present, I have taken into consideration merely the absolute considerations, i.e., such considerations as apply to everyone. I now come to the relative considerations, which are individual, because they aim at rectifying the type of the species which is defectively presented, and at correcting any deviation from it existing in the person of the chooser himself, and in this way lead back to a pure presentation of the type. Hence, each man loves what he himself is deficient in. The choice that is based on relative considerations, that is, has in view the constitution of the individual, is much more certain, decided, and exclusive than the choice that is made after merely absolute considerations. Consequently, real passionate love will have its origin, as a rule, in these relative considerations, and it will only be the ordinary phases of love that spring from the absolute, so that it is not stereotyped, perfectly beautiful women who are wont to kindle great passions. Before a truly passionate feeling can exist, something is necessary that is perhaps best expressed by a metaphor in chemistry. Namely, the two persons must neutralize each other, like acid and alkali to a neutral salt. Before this can be done, the following conditions are essential. In the first place, all sexuality is one-sided. This one-sidedness is more definitely expressed and exists in a higher degree in one person than in another, so that it may be better supplemented and neutralized in each individual by one person than by another of the opposite sex, because the individual acquires a one-sidedness opposite to his own in order to complete the type of humanity in the new individual to be generated, to the constitution of which everything tends. End of section 20. Recording by Arden.